your lunch, and I hope you're still here with us, and it's not going to be really a graveyard shift, because the next speaker is going to keep you on your toes. It's going to ensure that it's a participative presentation so that we don't fall asleep. If I may ask that we all settle, then we take the next presentation. So we are going ahead with our program, and at this hour, we are going to do a presentation by Mr. Solimo Khaladi, Organizational Resilience during and post-COVID-19 pandemic. A leadership challenge done by Mr. Solimo Khaladi. So if I can just introduce him to you. Okay, Mr. Solimo Khaladi boasts years of experience in leadership, especially in the public sector, coupled with a proven track record in operational leadership, strategy development, project management, financial and people management, as well as stakeholder management. He holds a master's degree in public management, obtained from Regency's School of Public Management, amongst many other qualifications that he has. He also completed the Gordon Institute of Business Science Executive Leadership Development Program, besides the Change Management Leadership Training with RIPA in London. So when he talks about change management, he talks about something that he has studied and that he understands very well. Years in the public sector, which include that of Executive Director for Service Delivery Training and Development at the South African Management Development Institute, SAMDI, before it was called Palama, before NSG. Then he became the Chief Director at the then NSG, now the National School of Government, at the then Palama, now the NSG. He was a Deputy Director General at Public Sector Development in the Gauteng City region. He was the DDG of Public Sector Development at the Gauteng City region. At the local government sphere, he served as Regional Executive Director for Region 2 in the city of Tshwane, and later as Chief Executive Officer of Tshwane Economic Development Agency. His current passions is management consulting in broader organizational development discipline, that is learning and development, strategy mapping, performance consulting, and so on. So Mr. Mkhaladi will be talking to us about leadership in the times of COVID-19. And as he has been a manager, a leader for quite a number of years, he will also be bringing in his experience as a public servant. Ladies and gentlemen, may we allow Mr. Mkhaladi to come and address us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, Dr. Izzy, and colleagues. Let's get going with the presentation itself. I'm going to suggest that we look at slide number 3, because this is just an opening slide that explains the topic. It has already been covered. So if we can move to slide number 3. The topic is essentially about organizational resilience. And what I want to say upfront about organizational resilience is that it's not about weathering the storm, because that tends to be a temporary intervention. Weathering the storm implies addressing the current crisis. But with organizational resilience, one is suggesting a step further than that. It's important to weather that storm, yes, so that we can stay afloat. But of course, as we weather that storm, we need to be looking at how do we position ourselves for the future. So resilience does not look into the present alone. It also gravitates towards repositioning our organizations for future survival. So what then it means for organizations is the following, and this has been something that is anchored around the impact of COVID-19. Part of that topic has already been covered by Dr. Izzy in her presentation before other presentations could follow, citing experiences as gleaned from the perspective of the NSG and what the NSG sought to do in order to reimagine their strategies and reposition themselves for effectiveness. We all know about this COVID, but the way it has impacted on organization has been in various ways. More than one, where to a very large extent it caused an extensive disruption never seen in the work of the public service before. So it was a disruptive crisis at the start, but plenty of opportunities for now and into the future. And this reminds me about the saying that says, never leave the opportunity to do something out of a good crisis. So every crisis, colleagues, presents with it an opportunity to start something that has never been there. So in a sense, it enables organizations and managers to be trailblazers in various ways. And this is what COVID-19 was about. So when we can talk about the ill effects of this pandemic, but to a certain extent, it ushered in opportunities previously unimagined, and opportunities that we need to take advantage of and run with them through the door, making our organizations as innovative as we can afford. But what COVID-19 also did was to increase exposure to risk. I'm not going to repeat the point that Dr. Izzy made about cyber attacks and so on. So it presented risks like any other thing that was not there before. It comes with a package of risks. And that is why at the center of a turnaround in terms of organizational resilience, we need to be looking at the imperative of risk management. So moving away from the concept that risk management is the domain of the risk management unit in departments, and we don't have much to do with it as people that are not working within it. So COVID-19, if anything, has suggested that all of us must be risk takers, must be risk owners, must be risk managers in various ways. And that is what is expected of us as managers, and this does not exclude HR managers in particular. So we have seen with the breakdown in business processes, operations, lapses in organizational culture, norms and values. I mean, earlier on a point was made about people that are just refusing to come back to the workplace. It has something to do with culture. And how do we effect that turnaround where we do not necessarily coerce people to come to work, but we incentivize coming back to work amongst our colleagues? Because one of the things that we must not lose sight of, particularly with the impact of COVID-19, is the ability of management to harness trust among fellow employees. It's not going to be something that is automatic, but it's something that we need to be working on steadfastly up to a point of realization. So it's not a magical blueprint. There's no bullet point around it, magic bullet around it, but there's an issue about working on it, building it, harnessing it, and seeing it to fruition. COVID-19 is about business unusual. We have heard this term before. It talks about adaptive capacities, innovation, experimentation. Earlier on, I was talking about one of the things that emanated from the presentation that Mr. Lawrence was making, and I emphasized the centrality of things like agility, all right? Being able to be flexible around issues, as change agents, and this is something that we know. So there's no addressing COVID without seeking to be innovative. And I want to stress the point that I made earlier on today, that a return to the pre-COVID-19 norms and standards is one luxury that we should not even think about. It's not going to come, it's done and dusted, it's water under the bridge. What it often means is that there needs to be an understanding of nurturing lateral organizational learning. I spoke about embracing start failures. So the failures do not have to be perennial. They do not have to be permanent in organizations. But when your colleagues are going to be making mistakes, in the interest of making the organization to grow, you must embrace those failures. Inject a lot of thinking into the planning processes in order to minimize the potential of these failures becoming huge in volumes. But these are not things to be condemned because they are learning curves in any organization. And I'm sure as we do appraisal of performance in our own respective departments and divisions, this is the consideration that we should always bear in mind. If your colleagues are able to demonstrate that we failed, but what we intended to do has to do with addressing the bigger picture, that doesn't need to be condemned, colleagues. It needs to be harnessed, it needs to be encouraged, because it implants a mindset of growth and development in your staff. So it's quite dicey. You need to know how to manage it, other than just take it to be a failure. It also talks about continuous improvement. How often have you heard this term called continuous process improvement in organizations? It's exactly that. Processes are not there permanently. And if anything, COVID-19 has ushered in the new reality that we need to be looking at our business processes regularly. It's not a matter of annual reviews of business processes, and we must cost this in terms of what human resources they need, but also what time they need and what budgets they need, almost constantly. And again, it's not the domain of people that work in organizational design and organizational development. We are forced to be multi-skilled. As HRD practitioners, we normally talk about the imperative of multi-skilling our colleagues, but it starts with the man in the mirror, as Michael Jackson said. So at the forefront of this revolution on the multi-skilling of public servants, it's exactly yourselves, because the days of the conventional HR are over, colleagues. We are into the period of strategic and catalyst HR functions in organizations. So what this means for leadership is that we need to be looking at a number of things, right? What is this? Growing up absenteeism, right? No, we're there, right? The current and post-COVID-19 leadership burdens. There's an aspect of growing absenteeism in the workplace. We have heard about this in the morning. We're not going to reiterate that point. And this suggests a need for a review of the regulatory frameworks. Because who said if absenteeism is bad, then presenteeism is good? No one. The two are actually two evils. You may be having people that are coming back from work from home, coming into the organization, and you see the warm bodies and you think productivity levels will go high. It may not necessarily be the case. So this is not about binary logic. It's not either presenteeism. The minute it assumes the tag of an ism, that is not something that we should be embracing. And that is why modern organizations are going for something that is called the hybrid model. They're not looking at work from home absolutely. They're entertaining work from home, living in conjunction with people showing themselves up at work. So it's a hybrid model. So always where there's contestation between two phenomena, the solution does not lie in either of the two. It's always in the middle of the road. And that's why the thinking around hybrid models. We are seeing low productivity levels, as some of you have already mentioned, and the declining work ethic. Lack of balance between results and remote working, low-level employee resistance, where people would say, and this is normally something that comes from the junior ranks, if others can work from home, I can too. As if working from home is a luxury. My own experience has shown that working from home has been a burden, especially for senior management. Right? So some that are calling for being like you do not know what it involves. And let me tell you, in other organizations, particularly the multinational corporations, where you would be, for example, working in organizations like BMW, the chances are that your colleagues are somewhere in Australia and others in the US, some in the UK, and you are forced to get into a meeting at the same time. The time zones are different. So you have a situation where this notion of the work-life balance does not necessarily become applicable. But you find yourself working to the point where you are overworked when other people think that this is luxury. So we need to have a balancing act and understand the different permutations that this brings with it. Reskilling the workplace, we have mentioned that point, including research-based remote learning and development interventions, which are resilient and future-ready. Because if you are going to do things that are temporary in nature and not seeking to be future-ready, we are shooting ourselves in the foot. So if anything, L&D is mission-critical for future-fit organizations, as we speak about the reskilling agenda. The days where if people leave their jobs, we look at the organogram as HR and say box number A is fully funded but vacant, and we do things the way we have been doing them in the past, it's not going to help. What becomes the imperative today is, yes, the box is vacant, yes, it is funded, but do we have to do a similar recruitment process as we did in the past? The answer is a resounding no, because the skills for the future may not necessarily be what was the case before. Got that? So this is how scary it is, but you look mystified. It's not as scary as that. We can lock horns with it and we can win it. So what this means is that as we speak about the reskilling, we need to be looking at the future of our organizations and say, looking at what COVID has done to us, this is what it's been suggested. And how do you get to understand the requirements of the future? You do that through reading trends. Looking at what other organizations such as yourselves are doing elsewhere. We call this benchmarking. Make sure that as we do the benchmarking, it has an international character because it must respond also to global considerations. But never get shy to do internal benchmarking as well. We are seeing a lot of accountability deficits, colleagues. And top management, like I said, is often on its own. It's not my work. I'm a mere DD. I'm a mere deputy director. I'm not at the accounting office when things go wrong, right? So there's a lot to bear on the can carriers, and the can carriers are the leaders in organizations, the apex of the organizations, yourself, essentially. We are seeing a high turnover of staff as a result of COVID, including unhealthy turnover. Now, what do we mean by unhealthy turnover of staff? Because oftentimes when people speak about the turnover of staff, it's like it's a swear word. People are leaving the organizations. Mark you, there is a positive turnover or a healthy turnover, right? And an unhealthy turnover. So when these people who are leaving are people who are not going to be relevant into the future organizations, why worry? It gives you an opportunity to make your organization future ready by getting the right skills into that space. Because let's face it, we are not going to address all capacity requirements through training. Capacity happens in various ways and at various strengths. There is capacity that is systemic. It needs to also interrogate the business processes and the entire system at the workplace. It's not something that can be restricted to nurturing the mind and developing the mind in order to execute a particular function. A lot of it has got to do with a wholesome change and a systemic change in the organization. And we are also seeing an absence of horizontal integration of planning system and processes. Where, for example, the IT section is the one that is moving, because this is what COVID-19 is suggesting. But if IT is going to move ahead of the pack, HR stays behind. Other functions within the organizations are not moving in tandem with IT. Nothing is going to obtain in that organization. So I stress the point that the digital transformation, it's anchored around technology, but technology is not the end and the be-all. Technology is the enabler of strategy. So if we are going to get it right, it needs to be coupled with the right culture fit within the organization, because guess what? A wrong culture eats organizational strategy for breakfast. If the culture is wrong, the strategy won't fly, no matter the amount of technology we employ to try and get things right. Next. Colleagues, here, here is an issue about now, after a year, in the largely remote working mode, many employees are feeling real burnout and digital overload. Meeting volumes have increased nearly 150%, and 40% of employees report feeling overworked, exhausted, or both. So the whole question around Zoom fatigue, MS Teams fatigue, everything being about sitting behind a laptop and participating in a meeting, with all the frustrations that come with it. It's becoming a greater disincentivization among the high flyers in organization. And if these people are going through this digital overload thing, and they can't even go on holidays because of bans on international travel, it multiplies the frustration and deepens the crisis of low morale in organizations. Got that? So this is the problem that is real. We thought that this would be the solution, that people will work through computers and so on, but in themselves they are creating a peculiar problem that is facing us as management within the public service. And of course, we need to lock horns with this. If your home is your office and you're always at home, then you're always at the office. Does it resonate? You got that from Dr. Easy earlier on, right? How debilitating it can be to always be behind a computer. Other organizations that are investing in their people are also unleashing wellness programs just to try to get the mental configuration right of employees, because the minute you tend to associate your home all the time as your office, you begin to hate your home. Is it true? I don't know. So we are going to look at some of the trends that are coming and some of the research outputs that have been spoken about. And what will be coming next, it's actually the survey that was conducted in 2020 and the survey outcomes of how learning will be delivered in future. And this is coming from an organization called the Learning Guild. And again, I'm going to encourage you to perhaps get into researching what the Learning Guild is doing. And the reason I'm making this call is because my future understanding of the PSTF is exactly becoming what the Learning Guild is doing as the PSTF. Getting into things like conducting surveys, developing research outputs, so that you can play that role that I spoke about in terms of policy advisory role of public service managers, and particularly HRD. There shouldn't be in the country an HRD agenda that is driven for the whole of the public service without the input of the PSTF as a collective. But how we must do that depends on how agile are we with the generation of new ideas in the HRD landscape, and how thorough are we in the research that we must conduct. So I'm not seeing in future PSTF forums continuing the way they are continuing. They need to be trailblazers when it comes to setting the HR agenda for the South African public service. So this is what the Learning Guild is doing. And the reason why I like this part that I'm explaining is because it also makes you a dynamic structure as a PSTF. It also enables you to generate your own revenue. Because remember, these surveys, these research outputs do not come for free. People buy knowledge, right? People buy information. So if anything, become a smaller CSIR, Human Resource Research Council of some sort, but with a particular focus on public service. Now, what are they telling us? They are telling us that in future, if you look at that that particular graphic, it tells us that the majority of training is going to be virtual instructor-led. There will only be a few that will require some elements of face-to-face learning, right? But a lot of it is going to be virtual. And across the various years, the categories that explains many people say that, including how they look at the year 2022, which is the last column. So many people, right from 2019, have been forecasting the idea of virtual instructor-led training. And this will be saying something about how we look at the development of HRD strategies in our departments. If it is not going to resonate with the research outputs that are coming through, the point is that we are not going to remain relevant. So these are some of the trends and these are some of the forecasts that are coming through, and we need to reposition ourselves correctly. So about organizational resilience, because I've been talking about the impact of COVID. Resilience is grounded on good undertaking of disruption-related risk and developing plans to mitigate the risk. And we need to learn from what the committees that were set up in this country when we sought to address the COVID-19 pandemic were structured. Remember, they were risk-led. So also organizational resilience is about that. It's not about quick fixes, colleagues. No magic bullets about it. And it's premised on making the four legs of the elephant dance in tandem. Because this should remind you, Four Legs of an Elephant Dancing is a short book. And I'm going to recommend that, again, you read what it means, because it's anchored on the development of strategies that work, making the four legs of the elephant dance. If you Google it, it will lead you to a book. It's a very short book. You can read it at bedtime, all right? And exhaust it, like Who Moved My Cheese, when you are doing change management. Okay. So what making the four legs of the elephant dance implies is that an organization that only dances in one aspect of its own life, it's not going to be future fit. It's not going to be relevant. This resonates with the point I was making earlier about IT being ahead of the pack instead of moving in tandem with the rest of the organization. So when the organization is together, like you get reminded about the balanced scorecard approach, this is exactly it. This is exactly how we must get things running. People, issues, resources, systems, all together in tandem. It's not about weathering the current storm, but also about being ready for the next wave. Now, these pandemics, Dr. Ma just spoke earlier on about the fact that today we might be having the COVID-19, but the next pandemic, it's likely to be in the area of climate change, right? And the others could be in the areas of global famine. This is serious, colleagues. The issue about the scarcity of food and food security becoming a distant reality in the future, it's scary. I was reading some research articles. Already people in the UK and the US, where there's no luxury of fertile agricultural land, have been advised to do some stockpiling on food. That's how serious the situation looks. Areas where the temperatures are very low, there is cold all throughout the year. That means you don't have vegetation there. And if you don't have vegetation, you can't have food production. And that's why some of them are exploring new agricultural innovations like vertical farming, hydroponics, right? Where you grow these things within enclaves and you do not necessarily depend on arable land. Okay. But places such as Africa, I mean here, the Eastern Cape, where you still have the abundance of agricultural land, keep it for posterity. The issue about global famine, it's not going to be something that emasculates Africa from the crisis. So it will come, and if anything, we are going to experience a scramble for land. In historical terms, we used to talk about the scramble for Africa. There's going to be the reality of the scramble for land as food becomes scarce. I'm raising these things because we are being told that these are things that are going to be happening. So as we speak about the pandemics, let us not only think about the things that are going to make ourselves unhealthy, but the things that are going to affect our normal life as human beings, and therefore impact on what we are doing in our own workplaces. So how do we make organizations progress to organizational resilience? How do we begin to address that, right? The slide that follows shows us that trajectory, right? That movement. If you look at the bottom part between the y-axis and the x-axis, it talks about being unprepared, and if we are unprepared, we normally adopt the stance of being reactive to a problem because we are unprepared. So we react, but we react in manners that are not adequate to resolve the crisis. So there's nothing, it is the beginning of a journey somewhere to somewhere. And where is that somewhere? So somewhere in the middle, you'll develop, like COVID is beginning to show us, we are able to make some projections into the future and get ourselves prepared. But even with the state of being prepared, we are not yet resilient. It is only when we reach the stage of being adaptive, where our organizations are agile and flexible, infusing the use of technology in them, that we can begin to think about being sufficiently resilient. Now, the last part of the presentation looks at the various models that are emerging in other countries. such as Australia, such as the UK, the OECD countries in particular, that are beginning to interrogate very seriously this thing called organizational resilience. So the first one, it's actually something that is looking at risk management as the center, but it is more about systems, non-person issues within the organizations and getting them right. And of course, if you go back to the earlier point that I was making around making the four legs of the elephant dance, you'll realize that interventions in systems and processes only, it's not going to be enough. So this is what people are saying. Get your security management right, business continuity plans up and running, crisis management proper, emergency management, and address the risks across all these areas of work. And in that sense, you'll be resilient. Obviously, there are shortcomings because the focus is parochial. It's not necessarily wider. It is looking at particular areas. Now, the next one becomes a model that is called attributional resilience model, right? And what is this attributional resilience model talking about? It is beginning to talk about the importance of change in organizations, being sensitive to change, integration, interdependencies, values. So instead of being on the hard issues only, unlike the previous model, this one is beginning to argue also around the importance of the softer issues. What values do we entertain in this organization moving forward? So that is one model that is coming. And another one, which is the final model, is the composite resilient model. Now, it's called composite, colleagues, because it is bringing together good elements from the previous two. So it is taking from the non-persons issues, harder issues alongside the softer issues, and making a composite model possible in organizations. And this is where I would encourage you to look. That as you grapple about trying to make your organizational systems and whatever resilient, make sure that you pay attention to all aspects of that organization. And what it does is that it anchors everything on strategy, but it also looked at one of the most important things that if you forget everything about these models, but this one you should remember. You'll see that the common factor in this model, it's something that is called imagined leadership. Imagined leadership is not yourself. Imagined leadership are people that work below you, but who have got a good story to tell and a good advice to give to yourselves. And it says, nurture that talent in the organization as you seek to make yourself very competitive into the future. So questions for leaders, colleagues, as I draw to the conclusion. What is to be done differently moving forward? It's business unusual, remember? So each time you have to do something in terms of developing your new annual operational plan, think about what is it that I need to be doing differently. It can't be business as usual. What are the labor relations implications and policy changes required now and beyond? The presentation that we will get from Tanya Cohen tomorrow is touching on the aspect of work from home, and she goes at length because she's a qualified lawyer and she goes into issues about labor relations. Very interesting. So I won't put a lot of emphasis on the second point because she'll be addressing that tomorrow. How do we deal with the softer issues, increasing COVID-19 infections, stigma, and general employment wellness? I mean, I was making a joke, a very simple statement with my colleague before we started this session, and I was saying, if organizations, for example, completed their restructuring processes, there are normally people who do not fit into the new structure, right? Where do they belong? You should know this, HR. They are brought into what is called a pool, right? But be aware of the stigmas that the word pool creates. The intentions are good. But if you are going to put people in a pool, something about them swimming, right? So manage that pool in such a manner that you are able to derive some benefits out of it. Are leaders going to hit the reset button? Reset button, you can't, because there's no going back to pre-COVID-19 norms and standards. After the pandemic, factory settings, going for factory settings, there's no luxury for factory settings here. Or will they have to pivot quickly, like a pivot door, right? This is not working, we must therefore turn around and do something differently. Reimagine and think, rethink and think about and subject everything to a process of rethinking. And how to retain the high flyers in departments, because as I made the point earlier, many of them got to be despondent. Now, what are the trends, colleagues? The future of work. Emerging from COVID-19, companies are pushing HR, yourselves, to take a more active role in redefining how and where work gets done. Initiatives such as, for example, redesigning the physical work environment. The issue about office, we like this building and we think we must go there. It's not about us liking it. Is this building resonating with the work that must be done in this department? So your tenant installation is not something that is done the way it was done before, okay? Obviously, things like open floor spaces, even if you design them, you must design them with social distancing imperatives in mind. Shifting towards strategic HR planning, new organizational structures, they can't be the same as before. Chasing digital talent and hybrid workforce. So it doesn't follow that because a person has left, let's fill the post. You may have to consider things like hybrid workforces. Some staff might have to be permanent, but the rest may not be permanent. So procure talent that is not necessarily a talent that is going to be few and agile in organizations. It doesn't mean that you must encourage unemployment, but of course you need to scratch where it is itching. Enabling transformational change will become one of the urgent priorities moving into the future, right? Post-COVID emerging learning trends, good all face-to-face learning and in-person training will always be there and based on learning preference and necessity of learning transfer. There are things like virtual learning events, reverse classrooms, we need to be looking at all this, self-directed learning as people do online learning at their own pace, blended learning programs as we know them. So some of them are not rocket science, they're already in place. Now, I'm getting into implications for training and development practitioners. We called upon to do effective learning operational management, colleagues. DPSA has developed an operational management framework. Let's study that and seek to understand what it means for our own divisions. One of the bedrock skills of learning practitioners, but it will be required on a complex scale, especially with integrated global organizations with centralized learning functions. We also called upon to look at learning practice design skills, right? Effective learning curation. How do we use the resources that were meant for particular purposes but have got to be repurposed in order to promote learning and development? Relationship management, having to trust people that we have not trusted before. Not seeing everybody that's working from home as somebody who is resisting to come back to work. And trends continue. To look at this, it will tell you that the past year has reshaped the global talent market. Okay. And that information is for you to read. Obviously, a lot of these are countries that are developed countries. So you may have to have different permutations for countries in sub-Saharan Africa. But this is the point about COVID-19. So colleagues, in anything, that was the slide, the last slide, I think. because the next one is just a concluding slide. But my appeal to you is that never look at COVID-19 as a pandemic that is causing a disruption that is altogether unhealthy. Let's grab opportunities that it presents, whatever these opportunities are, move along with that. Let's begin to be in a position to identify some of the new things that we can do in our department. But more importantly, let us be bold in addressing what needs to be addressed. Let's be entrepreneurial in spirit, and let's become the change agents that Lawrence spoke about. On that score, I want to thank you for listening.
Gender sensitive. Thank you, Brussels. Can we give him a round of applause, please? I must mention one thing. The person who designed this stage was not gender sensitive. Yes. Anyway, thank you very much for the informative presentation. I got scared a little bit when you mentioned some of the things that you mentioned. I don't know about the colleagues. You know, it's not business as usual anymore. Things have changed. We cannot go back to where we used to be. We cannot be who we used to be previously. We need to move with the times. Are there any questions, comments that you would like to pose at this stage? I mean, our presenter spoke about weathering the storm. He spoke about how do we provision ourselves for the future. Like I've already said, business unusual. Yes, COVID came with extensive disruption, but out of those disruptions, there were opportunities. And those people who had their eyes open, who were innovative, who were creative, they were able to tap into those opportunities. So the question is, you and I, did we see any opportunities out of the pandemic? He mentioned that we need to be risk takers as managers. We need to be risk owners in various ways. We need to learn out of what has happened and look into the future in terms of what is it that we can do differently. We need to have an adaptive capacity. We need to be innovative and creative, come up with new ways of doing things. We cannot be running around with submissions anymore, knocking from one office to the other. Let's do things differently. How can we automate our processes? We have heard that there is an academy in the pipeline for the province, but it's going to be a virtual academy. You will not see a building that says academy. I'm quoting one of the speakers, so please bear with me. So colleagues, shall I take questions at this point? Are we tired? Are we burned out? Any questions, comments, inputs? Is it that time of the day? Is there a question? No. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Is he here? Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Thank you. So colleagues, we really need to think about how we do our work. We need to have a mind shift in terms of what has happened over the past year. Some of the positions that we have, the boxes that you talked about, Russell, do we really need warm bodies in those posts? It might be that, yes, you need a warm body, but not to do that kind of work anymore. You need to move them somewhere else. So these are the questions that we need to ask ourselves. And also it has provided a lot of growth opportunities and development. People had to learn new skills. We had to learn how to use those technologies that we had never used before. So if you want to say to me that you are the same person that you were 12 months ago, then it means that you have been fast asleep. Yes, something has just happened to you, and you were not caught in the storm that we are all in. So we need to be multi-skilling ourselves. You cannot just be a facilitator for CIP. Let us look at other things that we can do within the department. And that is how we grow. I saw a hand at the back. Okay. Do we have a mic? Okay. Then after the question, I'm going to ask Dr. Shezi to come and do a wrap up and close for us.
Thanks, Program Director. And ndiyabulela nawe mhlekazi wami. The majority of us in this room, we are X generation. There are few baby boomers here in the room. I doubt if there's anyone from Y generation in this room. And now we happen in our workplaces to interact with Z generation. The majority of us experienced Y2K by surprise. Those that were already at work, when we migrated moving from 1999 to 2000, it was not very easy. And now we see ourselves in the same situation.
Yeah.
I just want to urge the trainers to emphasize the ease of change management going to this new era. There's so much that needs to be done, because all the issues that we're experiencing right now, the only way that we move forward is for us to change our mindset. Otherwise, we cannot go back. I have nothing much to say, except that we need really an urgent change management program within the public service. So all the challenges that we're having will have solution. Talking about the visual platform, when it comes to academy, I won't comment on that one.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Just to emphasize what you said, change management program is required, but most importantly, we need to change our mindset. Change is as good as a holiday. And the biggest asset that you have as a person is your mind. So once you get your mindset right, you will be able to achieve a lot of things. So change is very important for all of us. I would like to close the day. It has been a long day, and I'm very happy that almost all of you have been with us from in the morning when we started until now. I see people pointing and pointing. I don't know what they are pointing at or who they are pointing at. You need to say something. Okay. You know, if it was at a wedding, I would be charging all these people that are jumping on the program, and I'm quite sure I would have made a lot of money. But because it's a formal program, I have to be professional. Okay, I'm going to close, and when I close, I will call upon Dr. Shezi, and then Faith, then we can conclude the day. Okay. All right. I'm not the one who's confused, colleagues. Please pardon my colleagues. It's not Dr. Shezi who's going to come up to the stage. It is going to be Faith who's coming. And on my side, I would like to close and remind you that we are meeting again tomorrow, 8:30 for 9 o'clock. And I must congratulate all of you that you were on time. We were able to start 9 o'clock on the dot. So please tomorrow, if you can make it a point that we also start at the same time, same place. And on my side, I would like to conclude with a vision of the NSG. You know, as the NSG, our vision is to empower public servants to be responsible to citizen needs and government priorities through education, training, and development interventions. That is who we are as the NSG, and that is what makes us proud public servants as the NSG. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. At this stage, I'm going to call upon Faith to come and do a presentation, not the presentation, but a presentation of a token of our appreciation from the NSG. Faith, over to you. You have a mic there by you that you can use, then you don't have. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'm going to allow Mr. Lawrence van Zuidam to come forward. It is the culture of the NSG that if we have such functions, we show or give a token of appreciation to our guests. And you know, the position that you were occupying today was the very critical one. So as our keynote speaker, this is a token of appreciation from the NSG. And I was tipped by Dr. Shezi that it's also the culture of the NSG that we must also kiss. And then, due to COVID restrictions, because we want to comply, so we are going to pardon you today. You are not going to get a kiss. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Faith. I must just add to what you said. You're not going to get a kiss today. You will get it tomorrow. Colleagues, thank you very much. Enjoy your afternoon. See you tomorrow morning. Thank you.
Affecting our young people and women. And this school, we are hoping, can assist us with properly researched information on how best as government can we deal with these issues.
Colleagues, just a quick announcement. There is an after